Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a briefing on update of NPP. We're going to hear from Katrina Stewart from NPPA today, and she'll tell us about what will be announced publicly tomorrow regarding NPS. You'll hear about the timing and some changes there, and you'll also hear about the name that we've been teasing you has been coming, and will also then help to drive some of that the momentum and expectation that we would expect to have as we ramp up to the launch. From a Cuscal perspective, I'd like to introduce a couple of our new project team members. I'm joined today by Robert Saliba. Robert's joined us as the program manager. So we're really expanding the team and adding some additional senior resources to ensure that we give you the level of support that you expect. And also joining us today remotely is Kathy, who's managing your implementation team, and you'll hear a lot more from Kathy and her team as they really start to ramp up their activities as well. I think now I'm going to hand to Katrina. You'll be able to throw questions as we go through into the chat, and at the end we are expecting that we should have time to be able to respond to some of those questions. Again, how we've done this in the past, we'll respond verbally if you can put your questions into the chat. We will capture all of the questions and log those and publish those afterwards. So if we don't get a chance to respond to your question verbally, you'll be able to capture that through the project documentation with a written response as well. But Katrina, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and we do appreciate that you've given us this opportunity to present to our clients information ahead of the public launch, so that we're giving them the insights that they can start to think about and not just hear about it with everybody else.
Thanks, Nathan, and really appreciate the opportunity to come along this morning and give a bit of an update. So I'm not planning to talk for too long. I just wanted to give a little bit of an update on the roadmap update that we will be publishing to the market tomorrow, and to talk specifically, as Nathan mentioned, about some of the items within that roadmap that will obviously, I think, be of a lot of interest to everybody today, particularly as it relates to the name as well. Just a reminder that some of the material that you will be seeing this morning is under embargo until tomorrow, and probably till about lunchtime tomorrow, which is when we're planning to actually go live with some of the material that we'll talk a little bit about this morning. So in our April roadmap update, we are going to take the opportunity to talk just a little bit about kind of where the platform's at in terms of latest numbers, which you can see here. I think, overall the message is I think a great one in terms of we continue to see really strong continued growth and momentum, and that's really exciting. And I think particularly some of the great work that Cuscal's been doing with some of your organisations in terms of actually driving take up of the platform is really starting to come through, which is very exciting. The roadmap update will basically talk about where we are in terms of delivery of the platform's capability development, and it'll kind of really touch on two specific areas. So it will touch on the delivery of the data-rich message standards, so the structured data messages that we put in place for certain payment types like superannuation, payroll, tax and e-invoicing, and that those have been largely implemented as part of the infrastructure release in April 2021. It will then talk predominantly around what's happening with the mandated payment service. It'll touch on the timing, which I'm going to get to next, because I'm sure everyone's very keen to know what that is. It'll talk about the market-facing name, and it'll also touch on some messages around CDR as well and how that might be extended in the future. So in terms of the timing update, the NPPA board met last week and looked at the status of the program, and based on where we are and a number of factors, decided to set a new delivery date for the mandated payment service with a revised mandatory compliance date of 30th of June 2021. Our intention is to communicate this to the market in our roadmap update tomorrow, and wanted to share with you this morning what some of that kind of messaging is going to be, so which you can see on this slide. So it will talk about the fact that the delivery of the service is a key priority for NPP Australia and for the industry, that it's a multi-year program of work. It does require significant change to existing back office processes, technical systems and customer facing data channels. It will talk about the fact that the program is now in build and implementation stage. Significant progress has been made with mobilisation of resources across more than 100 participating institutions. But however, due to the degree of internal work that's required and due to the impact of some unexpected external factors, primarily COVID, which did divert resources and funding for a considerable part of 2020, that it's clear that some additional time will be required for us to be confident that we'll have a critical mass of financial institutions and also allowing time for comprehensive industry testing. And so based on that, we are extending the implementation date for the mandatory capability out to mid-2022. And we will talk sort of more specifically around that mid-2022 in terms of that's going to be our reference point, not necessarily the 30 June date. This does give us confidence that there'll be a critical mass of participation in the rollout of that service. And despite that adjustment, the program of work to bring the service to life continues. Further updates will be provided. You know, we're seeing lots of momentum, and we feel that particularly with the release of the name, that kind of demonstrates our commitment to bringing this service to life. Work is also underway now around how we actually replan some of those program milestones and the plans around that, and there will be further information around that in due course, which you know, we will provide that information to Cuscal, who will then communicate that out to yourselves as well.
I think there might be an error on that slide, Katrina. 30 June 2022. Oh,
sorry. Yes, correct. Yes. 2022, exactly. Thank you, Nathan. Sorry. So yes, it's moving to about 6 months to middle of next year. I'm just going to move now on to the identity development. So I just wanted to maybe give you a little bit of kind of background as to how we got to where we have gotten to with the name, rather than before I just unveil it. So there were a number of steps that we took to develop a market-facing identity. So we looked at sort of how we might develop some brand language and some naming territories, really to try and understand what were some of the key kind of factors of the NPS that were pivotal as we thought about what an appropriate name would be, which concluded that really it was about customers being in the driving seat as it relates to their payments. We did some initial assessment and testing with some user testing. We had a long list. We refined that. We then basically moved to a trademark process. We conducted some focus groups, and then we actually embarked upon a formal trademark process. We did have some kind of certain criteria that we used to think about a name. So, and some of those were really critical. It had to be trademarkable. We wanted it to be descriptive. We wanted it to be kind of functional and kind of describe what the service did. And what its purpose was. We wanted it to be kind of familiar and easily understood, people could recall it easily, and we wanted it to fit alongside KID as well in terms of kind of what that sort of family of brands would look like. So from that kind of criteria, we had about 350 options that we basically worked through and assessed. I'm obviously not going to go through them all this morning, but from that long list, we basically came to a short list of 6 options. And from there, we took those 6 options. We did some further work around IP searches and trademark process and focus groups. And from that, we basically came out with a name, which I'm delighted to reveal to you now, which is that mandated payment service will now be referred to as Pay2. And it, as you can see, the logo and the word mark is very similar to PayID as well, to kind of build that connection as well. And what we've also done is create that kind of symbol version as well of just the 2, so that if you're looking to use it in kind of mobile channels where you've got limited real estate, that's actually available to be used as well. We will, in the course of the program, very shortly provide more detail around identity guidelines and logos, etc. We're really keen to start to kind of get the name out there and have people start to use it as they talk about what was formerly known as the mandated payment service. So let me just touch on what's going to happen tomorrow when we actually publish the update on our roadmap. So we will be within the roadmap update itself, be talking about Pay2. We'll also be launching a website for the identity at pay2.com.au. It is going to be a kind of sort of light touch in this phase of the program that will basically touch on some benefits of the service, have some FAQs, And the intention will be further down the track as we get closer to delivery that we will actually launch a more in-depth version of that website. We've also developed some infographics as well, one that's focused more from a payer customer perspective, the other that's focused more from kind of businesses or potential users of the service and what the benefits will be there. We'll make all this information available through Cuscal, so that if you want to start to circulate that within your organisation or think about how you might want to incorporate it into some of your own materials, that's all available. We are also working on an introductory video as well that we'll look to put out into the marketplace later on in May as well. And then just briefly, I just wanted to touch on CDR. So as part of the roadmap update and the messaging that we have within that, we are touching on kind of how we see Pay2 coming together with some of the recommendations that were in the Future Directions report that was published just before Christmas. So reiterating some of the key messages about how we see that service supporting third-party payment initiation. And the fact that it has been designed to supporting customers to instruct third parties to initiate payments from their bank account as envisaged under CDR. As Scott Farrell referenced in his report, the delivery of that service could be one means by which financial institutions can meet any potential obligations to deliver payment initiation under CDR, and that actually that should be encouraged and supported as a potential way that financial institutions could meet those obligations. It reiterates that Pay2 builds upon the existing infrastructure and processes we have in place today, and that it also will have a governance model, and it has rules, and it has a liability allocation and risk management processes as well. So a lot of that is going to be in place. And that a key feature of the service is that third parties need just one access point to reach all of the NPP enabled accounts, either through a commercial agreement with an NPP sponsoring organisation or potentially as an NPP connected institution if an organisation chose to go down that path. And I think certainly the fact about the one access point is really a key selling feature of the service as well, and certainly from the market feedback that we've got, that's a key attractor. So certainly we continue to reiterate some of those messages around CDR as some of those stakeholders like Treasury and Data 61 and the ACCC kind of work through what their plans are as next steps in that space. And so then I will pause there in terms of the update and hand it back to you, Nathan, for any questions.
Thanks very much, Katrina. I do think that the name is great because it addresses that concern that some people may have had around their account being debited. So it's very much about reinforcing that this is a payment that you make to a trusted party. And I think we can start building that into our language. We'll certainly be updating all of our product documentation and the project documentation for clients over the next month as you bring out the brand standards and the usage, so that as all of you on the call start to adjust your project communications, you can start referring to the Pay2 service rather than mandated payment service.
Yes, and certainly that, on the selection of the name, it was intentional to try and make sure it was broad enough to cover actually all of the potential use cases that service could do, which is, as you say, Nathan, it's more than just debit, it's a whole range of other things as well.
There is no debit. It's an instruction to send a credit.
It is indeed.
So do we have any questions that you'd like to publish through the Q&A? I'll open up the floor, and we've got 74 attendees, so I'm hoping that we would have a couple of curious souls who would have burning questions to ask Katrina while we've got her here, or if you've got questions for me or Robert as well. Well, I'm going to take the silence as a mark of relief from many of you that you've now got more time to refine the solutions. The commitment that Cuscal will make to you is we're not going to slow down. We're going to keep our foot on the accelerator to ensure that you get more time to do your execution as opposed to having the same things. So excellent. The questions have started to come through.
We didn't shock everyone into silence.
Okay. So we've got a question around do any of the timelines change the scope or requirements for any of the bank or financial institutions? No, this is very much about ensuring we de-risk and enable the quality of the outcome. You also will de-risk the potential not to have a critical mass at the target time, because it much more lines up with where some of the feedback was coming through from a range of both identified institutions and participants in terms of when they thought was going to be their actual readiness rather than the target readiness. And that's answered another couple of the questions that have come through as well about the sort of impact on that critical mass. So the date in June 2022 will be confirmed over the next couple of weeks. The compliance date that we'll be working on with NPPA is 30 June. The market date that we communicate may be slightly different. It's not going to not be about dates, it'll be more around availability. So we want to uncouple that compliance from that marketing, because what your customers see is going to be the benefits, and what the market sees should be the benefits as opposed to a technical project compliance. Hence, that's why a lot of the dates that are communicated in the external facing information, we'll talk about more open implementations, but the dates we'll work on with you from a project perspective will be 30 June.
That's right. So we will talk about mid-2022 from a kind of market-facing perspective, but the actual date is what it's now stated.
I've got one question, Katrina, but this is probably a more technical one that I think that we will come back with a more fuller answer around why CAT SCT isn't being used and simple SCT is. I think that's probably one that neither you nor I are probably totally qualified to answer, but I'm happy for you to have a go.
Sure. So I think the short answer is that many of the banks implemented the ability to receive for CAT SCT just in April, so it's just a few weeks ago. So it's still relatively early. So I think we'll expect to see some traction on that later on, as we kind of progress through the year.
And I think the question might have also been in terms of NPS as well. And I guess if you're initiating the payment yourself, you know what that purpose is for. Therefore, it becomes a simpler transaction because it's a solicited payment as opposed to unsolicited payment that needs to have instructions about what to do with it.
Mm.
So our team is working. We've got a question around Cuscal's publishing new timelines. So we'll be working on timelines over the next couple of weeks. We started that work last week, but it will take us a couple of weeks to get that in place. We'll have some draft timings within the next fortnight. We've committed to NPPA to review with them our time by the middle of May, and we'll also then review with you as our clients, validating some of those around that time so that we could look to lock in a new schedule by the end of May. So I've got one question around concern. Are there any concerns that external marketing of the name will set unrealistic expectations with consumers? So how are you managing that this is about building momentum as opposed to the marketing law? So
that was a subject of a lot of discussion internally within NPPA and also with the participants as well. And I think where we landed was we felt that with the momentum of the service, we wanted to demonstrate that commitment, but also as we're seeing quite a bit of activity in the marketplace of people increasingly starting to talk about NPS, and also in relation to things like CDR, and you've got other stakeholders starting to talk about it, that we actually felt that the time was right to introduce the market-facing name so we could start to entrench that before NPS got too entrenched into people's kind of vernacular. And Our focus is really going to be more on the kind of industry and more on kind of sort of potential users of the capability in this kind of initial phase, less so with actual kind of sort of payer customers. We see that as coming later on as we get closer to delivery of the service. So our focus is going to be more about kind of communicating to that audience about the service. But we did kind of feel that it was a good time to actually start to introduce that to the marketplace and get people kind of used to that as a name.
Got a question around other compliance changes. So one question around, are there going to be any other compliance changes between now and June, or are we focusing on Pay 2 as the next release? And another question around, does this mean then that the date for the IFTI settlement would be pushed out because of the timing of this as well?
Yeah. So certainly at the moment the focus is on NPS, and it's about working to that new date. There are not intentions at this point in time to change other compliance requirements. And I think as it relates to the International Payment Service, we'll kind of assess that as we progress and see how things are going, as we kind of get closer to that. But at the moment, there's no intention to move it. And we're also very conscious of the fact there's other work going on across the industry, and to some extent, there's a bit of a window to introduce some of these things and kind of get them in place as well. So, and a number of organisations saw kind of synergies with what's happening with some of the cross-border work and the ISO migration as it relates to HBCS. So we are trying to kind of see how things logically fit in as well from a broader industry perspective. At the moment, no changes.
So I think that feels like we'll need to start working on the October 2022 compliance release before we go live with NPS.
And certainly we will be, as well as it relates to documentation, etc. That's all going to be.
But no plan to introduce any changes in the April release. That there will be zero change for April.
Correct.
The other question around, has there been any consideration to make multiple to sign accounts optional for NPS eligibility? Because obviously that's a very challenging, and we've heard that from not just our clients, but I've heard that from other participants as well.
Mm-hmm. So, we do acknowledge that has additional complexity. I mean, I think there is more flexibility about how that process might actually work and how each financial institution might look to support that. But at the moment, there's no plans to.
Case by case basis.
That's right. Yes.
So that's some scenario analysis that Kathy and her team will be able to work with you on your implementations and work with the service providers that I know that some of them have had some specific issues. And I guess the elephant in the room, which will is probably the time for one or two last questions. Are we expecting further adjustments to the date later on, or is there sufficient confidence around June next year?
So that was subject to a lot of conversation. I think, we will obviously continue to track everybody's progress, and actually we're going to have a subset of the board actually monitor interim milestones as we actually go between now and that delivery date. But the conversation at the NPPA board was that mid-2022 date gave us confidence that we would have sufficient participation to enable us to deliver the service, recognising that we aren't going to wait for everybody, because then we'll just be moving at the pace of the slowest organisation. But it definitely gave us a higher degree of confidence, and that's the date that we're working to, and there's no intention to move subsequently.
So the last question prompted another one. Has there been any consideration for FIs to apply their own business rules to which accounts are eligible for NPS, even if they are available for single NPP payment use? So I know what the answer is. That's no. That would be, it's really important that we maintain the integrity of the compliance requirement that all accounts that can make NPP payments can make Pay 2 payments. We will work through with you individually on your compliance roadmap of how you meet that compliance. Will there be any interchange type fees on pay-to payments, Katrina?
No, so the intention is that pay-to from a wholesale pricing perspective as it relates to what NPPA will charge to NPPA participants would be on a unit transaction basis and kind of usage of the service. There's no intention to introduce interchange type approach.
And we'll wrap up with one last question, which is I think a nice little non-controversial. So should we now be referring to pay-to agreements rather than payment agreements?
Yes, that's right. So I think definitely we want to start to introduce that to the market. So yes, pay-to agreements. I mean, there might be some situations where you don't necessarily use the identity, just talk more generically about a payment agreement. But yes, we want to bring the two together. So a pay-to agreement. And we'll be updating all of the material that we've done so far as it relates to the CX work, etc., and the language and the terminology to reflect that as well. And we'll make that available to Cuscal to also share with you. Okay.
So thank you very much. We will capture all these questions, publish some feedback. It's great to get the clarity on where your hot buttons are from an identified institution perspective. So yes, we definitely know that you will have issues with those compliance broad rules, but that's our role to work with you on managing that, like we do with all of your compliance obligations. So thank you very much, and have a great day. And then, as you said, tomorrow you'll be able to start sharing this information once it's published. We'll provide you with formal notice tonight ahead of that launch. So again, that will be under embargo, but as part of our commitment to you to make sure you're informed, you'll get that in the after 5 p.m. today. Thank you.
Thank you.